The honourable member for Nanaimo, Ladysmith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're talking about budget priorities, spending of this federal government, the new Liberal government, and being elected in British Columbia and representing Nanaimo, Ladysmith, a coastal region. I just have to say the Prime Minister's tease last weekend that he's considering putting taxpayer dollars into the Kinder Morgan pipeline is certainly a shock to voters that thought that he was campaigning on a climate change initiative, not to mention his other broken promises on reviewing the Kinder Morgan pipeline process. Certainly no mandate from voters, and certainly, I'm sure, quite a great shock to the people that believed his promises around climate change, Indigenous assent, and new environmental reviews before threatening our coastline with any bitumen oil tankers. That said, I'm going to talk about the gender provisions missing from the Budget Implementation Act and missing from this government's budget. Women are named hundreds of times, but there's very little that is delivered that actually will affect the lives of women on the ground right now, next year. There's no money for pay equity, there's no money for universal affordable childcare, and how this government can think that they are for women's equality when they have not funded universal affordable childcare, so they have not reformed unemployment insurance so that all women are able to get access to parental leave. These are all serious holes, and the government had lots of advice from lots of the activists in the women's movement, including international organizations like Oxfam, the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, CUPE, Canadian Labour Congress. They really have been getting the best advice out there, and it's discouraging to me that they have not taken it up. On Tuesday, with my two of my NDP colleagues, we issued a report card on the day, on Canada's Equality Day, the anniversary of 33 years after the equality provisions were introduced into the Charter by the Conservative government, forced by the courts. We are still done waiting, and we found in our Tuesday analysis, found the gender provisions of the Budget and Budget Implementation Act very disappointing. So, speaking on Bill C-74, one of the first pieces is, again, child care crisis. There's still no universal affordable child care system. The current system barely serves 1 in 4 children. My own sister had to move out of Toronto because she couldn't find affordable childcare. She was paying more for childcare than she was for rent, she and her husband. This is a story that families across Canada are having again and again. The International Monetary Fund recommended that the Liberal government invest $8 billion a year into a universal affordable childcare program, and that it would pay for itself, in that it would allow working women to be able to return to work, to earn more money, to spend more in the economy, to be taxed on their income. Again and again, countries that have taken on a bold, new, progressive program like universal affordable childcare. These programs pay for themselves. That's certainly the Quebec example. In March, the Conference Board of Canada gave similar advice. So has the Bank of Canada governor. They're all recommending. I mean, these are very straight. What more credible economic advice could you get? And yet still, no new dollars. My colleague, the Member of Parliament for Saint-Hyacinthe, Bagot, has been doing good work on this in her critic role for children and families. We are going to continue to push for this most fundamental investment. That would be the first thing that you could help get women get further ahead. Pay equity, another big hole. Now, this is the words of the finance minister when he was making his budget speech. He said, in this budget, the government is taking a historic and meaningful step by moving forward with proactive pay equity legislation in federally regulated sectors. We can lead by example, and yet zero money for pay equity in this budget, not even the very simple ask that the Canadian Labour Congress and other Labour partners made, which was to right now establish a pay equity commissioner, an office of gender equality to be able to put the infrastructure in place, the program and administrative infrastructure so that you can make a program like Pay Equity run. Not even that. And still no legislation for pay equity, although the Pierre Trudeau government promised it 42 years ago. This current Liberal government promised it under pressure from myself and my colleague, the Member of Parliament from Jonquière, our very first Oppo Day motion in the House. We're so glad to have the agreement of the government that they will implement pay equity. But here we are, they're ragging the puck until the very end of the term. And surely if they wanted to have campaigned in the 2019 election on true feminism and truly investing in women, they would have done this most fundamental thing. $0 in this budget and still no legislation. Under questions and question period, the Status of Women Minister said it's not going to be until autumn that the bill is even tabled. That's not consistent with the advice that I got from the Consensus All-Parliamentary Pay Equity Task Force. It's not consistent with advice from any NGO partners. It's a great disappointment. We did see some movement in the budget, which I'm glad to see, about federal leadership on coordination of policies for preventing on-campus rape and sexual assault. That was good news. But a piece that was missing from my gender report card was our analysis of our repeated ask as New Democrats to the Liberal government that they fund women's the frontline women's organizations that are doing the bulk of the work around immediate servicing for women in this country. They're the ones that are answering the 24-hour hotline. They're the ones giving shelter when women are victims of domestic violence. They're the ones that are helping homeless women who are in terrible economic trouble. And again, we've heard these frontline groups saying, we do not want program funding that you write a grant application and you cross your fingers and you compete with your NGO partners and you hope that you might get the funding and you have to do something innovative and you only do it for a year and then the funding expires and then you have to lay the people off. Instead, what they want is operational funding, to be able to keep the lights on and keep their staff hired. The budget might have gone some way in that direction, but we couldn't tease out the wording. Since February, I've been asking the minister directly in private correspondence and also got her to make a commitment at committee. Can you please clarify what this funding will do? Is it operational funding for these frontline women's organizations who are keeping women safe and fed? Still no clarification. And then in the House on Tuesday, in response to my colleague, the Member of Parliament from Victoria, when he said, in Victoria, the sexual assault crisis hotline has had to close because they can't get operational funding. She said our report card was unkind, which was crazy language. Her budget was unclear. We've been giving her the opportunity to clarify. I really hope she has heard women's organizations, and if she is going to give them operational funding, if that is provided for in the budget, then I say thank you. But we can't tease it out. And if it is still speculative, competitive, only program funding, then that is a big disappointment. Public transit is another piece that's a big emerging part for rural women in particular. If there is no public transit, it makes them unsafe. In British Columbia, Highway of Tears is a prime example of that. But it also keeps women from saying yes to jobs. It's a true limiting factor, and we urge this government to make deep investments in rural public transit infrastructure. It keeps women safe and keeps women better ahead economically. We still found no measures to include equity hiring provisions in infrastructure projects. There have been great examples. The NDP government in British Columbia in the 90s put that as a condition on infrastructure investments, that you have to hire 20% women and equity employees, Indigenous employees. That worked very well on the Island Highway on Vancouver Island, where I'm elected. And it's such an opportunity. With this government making unprecedented spending in infrastructure, they should be tying those conditions in. That was absent from the budget. We're glad to see gender-based analysis legislation being committed to, but it really does need to be, now. And we asked for this Our all-parliamentary status of women committee asked for it 2 years ago. Still hasn't happened. That would make in a transparent way, all budget decisions come through a gender lens. We're glad to see the status of women ministry become a full department. The NDP's been advocating for this. Many election platforms. My colleague, the Member of Parliament from Elmwood Transcona, advocated for this at committee. 2.5 years later, the government's taken our advice, which we are pleased to see. So, in summary, this is a lot of talk, not enough action, not enough delivery for women on the ground, and I urge the government to accelerate and make real investments in women now. The economy will be better off, we'll all be better off, it will be more fair. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.